Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is Danny on episode number 251. Thank you for taking the time to join me on this next episode as we walk through the book of Mark. Today we are in Mark chapter 6. So we'll just jump right in. Jesus left there and went to his hometown accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Now, this is an interesting portion because I think I've shared on this before, but it comes back to mind again, is the people of his hometown. They saw Jesus through the lens of their experience, of what they knew. They knew him as a little baby growing up, a young boy, a teenager, and then into manhood. So they had this paradigm of who he was, and they were convinced they knew who he was. The son of Joseph, the carpenter, the son of Mary. They knew his brothers and his sisters. I don't know about you, but that's something I often forget. Whenever I come across it, it kind of strikes me. He had sisters. Jesus had sisters. And so it's not something I think about regularly or even really consider, but here it is, and it always, I guess, surprises me in a word, but though I'm not sure why. And so they were offended at him, and I think that we are guilty of the same problem. Those in our life that we are connected to, and most oftentimes connected to them intimately. We are well aware of who they are, of their faults, of them as a person. We know their character, and then we think, how is it that God is going to do something special or important or whatever, fill in the blank, through that person? It seems unthinkable, and it's easy for us to get offended at that notion. We don't hold people who are close to us, closely connected to us, as high as in high regard as we would, say, someone who came from us from a further off place, or someone that we weren't connected to either by family or by intimacy. And so Jesus says a prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown, among his relatives, and in his own home. Perhaps that is your experience. Even those in your family, whether that's your extended family, your immediate family, those in your household. And so, I wish we could be a people that would see rightly and appreciate rightly. I mean, I'm guilty of this as well. But we often don't appreciate what's right in front of us because it's what's always that's been in front of us. We have access to, all these luxuries in the United States, and if we're hungry, we can just go right to the pantry and get something to eat. And so we don't hold that in high regard. But those of you listening, in other countries, some far off and some remote, and some who it's really a miracle that you have access to listen to this. Those individuals would see what we have access to and just be in awe and shocked by the luxury that we have. And so oftentimes whatever you find in front of you in a very consistent manner, you can, if you're not careful, become accustomed to and complacent with that very thing. I mean, we see this in our relationships, those people close to us. We take that for granted, and then sometimes we find out too late that we should have given that more attention or appreciation. So I would challenge you and myself to, can we have the eyes to see that which is before us in consistency, and then ask God to help us to honor and to appreciate that which we don't. And by His grace, we may have eyes to see those things. And so, as a result of how they viewed Jesus, in a way, disqualified them from receiving the things that Jesus wanted to do for them. So it's kind of like if someone tells you something like, I'm going to do this, and for you to receive it, you'll be at this place. Well, if you perceived that person as, oh, that's just so-and-so, they can't do this, then perhaps you wouldn't show up to that appointed place and time, and therefore miss out on the opportunity to receive what was promised. I think of that kind of parallel to what maybe happened here. Now, just be sure, no question, that faith is directly tied to what Jesus did in terms of miracles. People's healings, Jesus explicitly made it clear, your faith has healed you, your faith has made you whole. So there is a direct correlation between the faith that's present to receive and receiving that thing itself. Now, faith itself isn't alone, because they may have had faith to receive, but if Jesus wasn't there, or if there wasn't the interaction, they wouldn't have received. They just had faith. So there's, I believe, a twofold, need, maybe is the word, a twofold need, which is the faith present, but also the word, that is the outed action of Jesus in terms of giving. So there's kind of a draw, a demand, if you will, not in the sense of you must, but it's like going to the bank to withdraw some money. You're making a demand on that which you have, but then there's also okay, here's your money. So there's kind of a mutual receiving and giving. If you go to your bank and you believe, you have faith that there's money there, you go to withdraw that money, but there's no giving of your money. Well, you can have faith all you want, but they may not be giving it to you. I think that we see that a lot in the experiences told of Jesus. There's a demand or a draw, but then there's a giving. I think of Peter when he walked on the water. Could just anyone go out and say, I believe that I can walk on water like Peter did, because Jesus will enable me to do so? And you may step out of the boat into the water, and you have all the faith necessary to stand on top of the water. But you don't. Perhaps, maybe you do. But I think that that's something often missed, especially in your let's put some labels on your charismatic, Pentecostal, uh, that type of flow, that type of denomination. You may there can be this overemphasis on faith, but I think, and I think that Scripture supports this, that it's not necessarily just the faith itself. We're not talking about faith alone in terms of salvation. Don't get that confused. Salvation is faith alone, but I'm talking here the exchange that happens between what you're believing God for and receiving it. Faith is a component of receiving that, but on the other side of your faith, there is the word that goes out for you to receive it. So it's a mutual cooperation of our faith and the word that goes out. And so I think, back to the analogy of the boat, if you step out and you may not stay on top of the water, you may go straight down. Why is that? Because you had faith, but the word didn't come. And so if we're not careful, we'll live our lives in such a way that we'll walk around full of faith, but we never see anything happen. And then we're confused and we're disgruntled at God, and maybe our feelings are hurt, and we're just struggling because I had the faith, and then you start to doubt yourself. Did I have faith? Was faith truly there? And so there's this kind of consistent or cyclical rub of, what is my faith even have anything? Is there anything there? I guess my faith is insufficient to produce, but I think that's just it. It's not just your faith that's producing the outcome. It's the word. Remember, Jesus said, "Come to me," and that is what enabled Peter to remain on top of the water. But it was his faith that, let's say, enabled him to step out onto to take that chance or that risk with doing something that he really had no business doing. That's not really a fair statement, but give me some grace there. By the laws of nature and that God has put in place, people don't just stand on top of the water. It defies the boundaries of physics and nature. So he really had no right to do that, except that it came from Jesus. The word came. And so his faith stepped out of the boat into the water, and God's word, that is Jesus saying, "Come," enabled him to do so. So it's kind of maybe not so much a rabbit trail, but I think something that's important for us to keep in mind, especially maybe as we relate it here to this verse 5, that Jesus could do no miracles there, except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. So perhaps this is a bit of, he was surprised at their lack of faith because they were not making themselves available to receive what he wanted to give them. And that's a very sad thing to consider, especially if the word was intended to come and someone could have gotten their breakthrough, an answer to their prayer, but because they lacked the faith, they were not present in the moment. That's very sad. All right, continuing on. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village, calling the 12 to him. He began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. Now, this is something else. Something else I just think on is he called them to him, and he sent them out 2 by 2. Do you think of the animals going into the ark with that? I do. Wonder what the connection to that is. And he gave them authority. Now, for Jesus to give them authority, wouldn't that suggest that they didn't have authority before? I think it's a reasonable conclusion, one that you could discuss, I think, fairly. But he gave them authority over impure spirits. I think of in that moment, Jesus. We know that the demons who are speaking to the sons who were trying to cast out demons, and I think they said, Jesus, we know. Paul, we've heard of or we know, but who are you? And so they lacked the authority to do what they were trying to accomplish, even though perhaps good intentioned. Maybe they have bad motives, but nonetheless, they didn't have, authority. Now, what exactly that looked like for these disciples, sending them out. We think about today, as children of God, we go and we do, and maybe we see and maybe we don't see. And there's a lot of moving parts that we may not understand. And just like his disciples, came to him and struggled with certain areas or things or being successful in certain things. And we can't necessarily see the whole picture, so we seek out clarity and understanding. But here we see there was a definite point in time where I think arguably they didn't have authority, and then they did because Jesus gave it to them. And that I do think that's an important thing to underline there is Jesus gave them authority. And again, kind of connecting that back to our previous statements of the Word came. And so the Word, Jesus, the Word made flesh, the Word came to them, giving them authority. So verse 8, these were his instructions. Take nothing for your journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off of your feet as a testimony against them. Now they went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. So here we see lots of opinions, lots of conclusions, some more accurate than others, and many completely inaccurate. So we see this in our day too. Be careful of conclusions. Be careful assuming our conclusions are correct, because it can lead us down incorrect roads. Verse 17, for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. That's fascinating. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. Now that is a huge promise. And so just think there for a second, what was available to her, to the daughter. And here's what she said. She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" Now, I've never thought this until just this moment. That's a good question. And congratulations to her for seeking counsel, something that we all could do better at. But here's even more important than the fact that she did get counseling, asking of someone. She asked the wrong person. And not only did she ask the wrong person, she listened to the wrong person. And even, I guess, a step beyond that, she assuming or believing that her mother would have her best interests at heart. Here we see that that was not the case. And so think of what she forfeited because of bad counsel, bad advice, bad guidance. And as a result of that, she lost out on half of the kingdom. "What shall I ask for?" she said. "The head of John the Baptist," she answered. That's the mother. Remember, she had a grudge against John because John was condemning the fact that Herod should not have married her. Verse 25, "At once the girl hurried in to the king with the request, 'I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter.'" Okay, this is worth mentioning, I think, because she asked for the thing the mother advised her to, but she added a little something to it. She, if you will, took it one step further. She asked for it on a platter, and I think this is a picture of what our responsibility is in regard to the next generation, our sons and our daughters. Depending on now again, this is kind of a global statement here. Depending on how we sow into our children has I think a significant investment in what the fruit of what is yielded in their generation. So the wickedness of the mother, that is, ask for the head of John the Baptist, her daughter, the next generation, took her wickedness a step further and asked for it on a platter. That's even more disgraceful, more wicked. And so I think that we see this, if we're not careful, in our future generation, is the next generation, if we sow wickedness into them, they will take it even a step further. Now, you do see Old Testament examples where the fathers were righteous and godly, and the sons could be wicked. And so I see there's kind of a disconnect there, though we don't maybe know explicitly how those righteous and godly or God-fearing, men or women, how they necessarily sowed into their sons or daughters, or the connection they had to their wickedness. So there's a lot of moving parts there, and I understand that it can be difficult to make blanket statements, but I do think we see that here in this example. Verse 26, "The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her." So there's a little bit of pride there, saving face, so it kind of forced his hand into something he did not want to do. Verse 27, "So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that he did not even have a chance to eat, He said, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." I think that's important for those in ministry to do. It's very important. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Now, notice there, he began teaching them. It didn't say the disciples saw them and taught them. So Jesus kind of, again, I'm using a little imagination here, but perhaps Jesus saw the need for them to rest and he permitted them rest, but he stepped in on their behalf. I still think that echoes the necessity for being in a quiet place and getting rest. Verse 35, by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" Notice they didn't say, "We don't have that much to give them." So maybe they did, and that's quite a bit of money for them to have. So sometimes we get a little bit uptight over ministries that have access to finances, and we can get offended at it. But we should just remember, God is not short of money, and if he decides to do a certain thing or permit a certain ministry to have this or that, we shouldn't get offended. We should just let God sort through the whole finance component, and we shouldn't be so easily offended. So, verse 38, "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." So Jesus is telling them in a sort of words, take inventory of what you have. This is good for us to do in our lives, especially spiritual inventory. When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples. Notice the order. He gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. I'm not going to spend time on this, but I find it to be very interesting, the numerical pieces that we have in that. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 baskets of bread and fish left. And the number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Now, that's just men, women, and children. Could have put it easily at 20,000 people, maybe more. Verse 45, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. This is a place that not necessarily a mountainside, but we need to find ourselves in a place of prayer, especially as it relates to refueling for our ministry, whatever that looks like. Ministry could be how you engage at work. It doesn't have to be you're a preacher or pastor or evangelist, etc. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. A lack of understanding either resulted in a hardened heart or was the cause of a hardened heart. You could kind of discuss both ideas. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So there's a lot going on here in Mark 6. And so hopefully some of those thoughts were helpful, beneficial, and thank you so much for staying with me through this one. And please share this with friends so we can get the word out so that God's word can go further and further. I thank you for tuning in, and until next time, God bless.